call it an opportunity rather than a disaster, shall we?
We do. We sort of, and this is one of the things, challenges of business, and you get people who sat on their sunglasses and they're a little bit devastated, but a little bit reluctant to fork out the whole full retail. So we do a 40% off discount if you fess up and you broke
you
the
say. Can you tell me, the other thing which always annoys me about sunglasses is the length of the arms, because sometimes, my ears may be a long way back or my face may be a long way forward, I'm not entirely sure what, but sometimes they just kind of sit on top of my ears. Are the lengths of all sunglasses arms all the same? Is it?
They're not all the same. So I would say that they're fairly standard, and they'll probably fit maybe 95% of people.
Okay. All right, that name, Josh, we've got to go there, but that name, Vilo, V-I-L-O, do a Google and you'll see the sunglasses.
Well done,
Josh.
Thank you so much. And Nalini Baruch and Michael Moynihan, thank you very much for being with me today on the panel. I really appreciate it. Wallace Chapman with you back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, all at sea, the cruise ship denied entry to New Zealand retreats to New Caledonia, low on fuel with a serious storm approaching and no guarantee of entry. So what next? And are there Kiwis qualified to fill the roles of crew denied visas because they're not considered essential workers? A military coup is underway in Myanmar. RIP the BBQ, the Climate Commission recommends phasing out LPG bottles and gas kitchen, petrol cars too. But who's going to absorb the price shock of going electric? The racing industry's reviewing security after a man trots into the path of thundering horses mid-race. And the June hoons ripping up our delicate beaches.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government is introducing legislation to uphold council decisions to establish Maori wards. Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta made the announcement in New Plymouth today. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
The Minister says the current system has a different set of rules for establishing Maori and general wards, and councils have asked for a law change. Ms Mahuta says the poll provision for Maori wards has proven an almost insurmountable hurdle for councils to overcome. The introduction of a Maori ward can currently be overturned by a citizens-initiated poll. The government will introduce transitional measures, putting in place the same rules for Maori and general wards in time for the 2022 local elections. Since 2002, 24 councils have attempted to establish Maori wards, but only 2 have been successful. Ko Robin Martin tēnei.
The European Union ambassador is trying to quell fears that new COVID-19 vaccine controls will delay New Zealand's vaccine rollout. Over the weekend, the EU introduced controls on vaccines bound for countries outside the bloc, including New Zealand and Australia. Nina Obermeyer says the step is being taken to ensure it receives its prepaid vaccines as expected. She says the EU wants to achieve greater openness for the global distribution of the vaccines. Ms Obermeyer says this transparency will benefit New Zealand and ensure it receives its full vaccine quota on time as per its own agreements. The COVID-19 response minister says there's nothing to suggest the EU's stance on COVID-19 vaccines will delay the rollout here.
We've not yet been advised by any of the vaccine companies that we have advanced purchase agreements with that their supply schedules, the timeframes under which they're expecting to deliver to New Zealand, would be affected by this. At this point, we are still working with them on the delivery schedules that were previously agreed.
Chris Hipkins says officials are in contact with the vaccine companies on an almost daily basis. A military coup appears to be underway in Myanmar, where the country's leader and other senior figures have been detained by the military. Phone and internet connections in the capital have been cut and soldiers are on the streets, as the BBC's Jonathan Head reports.
It's not entirely clear what their motives are, and there's been quite mixed messaging. The military's powers are significant, but it's no secret that Aung San Suu Kyi has long wanted to reduce those powers and get the military out of politics, although whether she could have done even with her really strong presence in Parliament, it's not that clear. Perhaps it was to preempt that, perhaps it was a sense of outrage that the military's own party did so disastrously badly. It only got 6% of the seats in all the Parliament, so it's not exactly clear, but it's obvious the military was very unhappy with the election result. It's not even clear at the moment whether the military is united behind this action. We don't know who's leading it, though we must presume that the Armed Forces Commander Min Aung Hlaing has approved it.
Jonathan Head with that report. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it is deeply troubled by the recent developments in Myanmar. A spokesperson says New Zealand is calling for the swift release of Aung San Suu Kyi and other senior political figures. They say the democratic will of the people should be respected. There are 58 New Zealanders registered as being in Myanmar, and they are advised to avoid unnecessary travel. The death of prominent painter Bill Hammond has been described as an enormous loss to New Zealand art. The Littleton artist died on Saturday at the age of 73. Art curator, writer and commentator Hamish Keith says Hammond's work had a unique vision from the very beginning.
They had this kind of compelling magic. Well, I'm looking at one right now, actually. It's called Snare, and it's birds hanging upside down. It's just extraordinary, but not only the image, but his brilliant command of technique.
Hamish Keith. It's 4 minutes past 5. Snowboarder Zoe Sadowski-Synnott has won a second medal at the X Games in Aspen. She's won a bronze medal in the snowboard big air event to go with the silver she won at the weekend in the slopestyle competition. She crashed her first run but turned in a strong second run, landing a front 1080, which set up her podium finish. Top Rugby League coach Graham Lowe says the Warriors will continue to struggle on the field and to retain star players unless they change their recruitment tactics. The Warriors will lose their captain and best player, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, at the end of this season after the fullback was released from the final year of his contract to sign with New Zealand Rugby and chase his dream of playing for the All Blacks. Former Kiwis and Manly coach Graham Lowe says the Warriors will likely spend up large to replace Tuivasa-Sheck, but he doesn't believe that's the right approach.
Their recruitment and retention of players, the Achilles heel that's been in the Warriors' makeup for a long time. I believe strongly in the talent that's available in New Zealand, that historically they will try and get a fullback who's played maybe 50 to 100 games somewhere else, and they will have to pay a premium.
Graham Lowe. Brighton and Hove Albion have claimed their first home win of the English Premier League football season after beating Tottenham 1-0. Defending champions Liverpool moved into third spot with a 3-1 win over West Ham, while Chelsea chalked up their first win under new manager Thomas Tuchel, a win at 2-0 over Burnley. That's the news.
The Climate Change Commission releases its advice.
I took a great deal of hope from it because the cost of the transition is far, far lower than we had previously estimated.
Greenpeace has a strategy.
To get to that 2050 target, the more you do early, the more chance you have of getting there. So it's the going hard and going early. It's exactly what we did with COVID.
And no buts, life will change.
Because something is cheap and nasty doesn't make it acceptable.
Counting the cost. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The North Island except Gisborne, fine apart from isolated showers about inland Northland today. For Gisborne, cloudy periods with the chance of a light shower. Bulla, Westland and Nelson, fine weather. Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from morning and evening cloud along the east coast. Isolated showers inland in the afternoons and evenings. Fiordland, fine today. Drizzle about the fields, clearing today and then returning tomorrow afternoon. Southland, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Chatham Islands, cloudy. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, driving climate change and who will absorb the price shock of going electric. But first, a cruise ship turned away from New Zealand is now stuck off the coast of New Caledonia, low on fuel with a significant storm approaching and no permission to dock. Le Laperouse has an economic exemption to come here for the cruise season, but last week was refused entry after immigration denied 61 of its 90 crew visas because they're not considered essential workers. The government says the ship left Jakarta before its paperwork was processed, but the boat's owner believes it and the crew were given the all clear to come. Pennant Cruises Asia Pacific boss Serena Bratton explains where the ship is now.
We had travelled 3,600 nautical miles across to New Zealand with our crew, with the intention of coming in with the approval of the Ministry of Health. When the Immigration Department have said to us that they will not approve the 61 hotel department workers, that we needed to depart the country. So we have done that, and we are trying to get into Namibia. It's been a difficult situation because we were low on fuel, and we're still very low on fuel. So we're waiting to get into Namibia. We're trying to see, we've spoken to the Immigration Department about the lack of available people who have sufficient safety training certification in New Zealand. We've been in touch with multiple recruitment agencies, with shipping service agents for super yachts, trying to identify how many, if any, New Zealanders could be available to work.
Are you saying that there are insufficient people available in New Zealand to fill the roles of the 61 people who are unable to get visas? Do we not have people who could step into those roles here in New Zealand? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So why did the ship leave Jakarta coming to New Zealand without the proper paperwork? Because, I mean, that looks a bit stupid, doesn't it?
Well, Lisa, we've been operating in New Zealand seasonally for the last 7 years, and our makeup of crew hasn't changed. It's been the same as it has for the past 7 years. Our application through to the Ministry of Health clearly spoke about the numbers of crew. In fact, we had more crew on that application than what we have on board, stipulated. It also gave the complete breakdown of nationalities for all of those crew on board the ship when the ship left New Zealand prematurely in March because of the pandemic. So all of that is in the paperwork, in the application. There is no surprises about it.
But that is the application for the ship, isn't it, Serena? Just to be clear, that is the application to get the ship in for the maintenance work and the paperwork for the ship. The immigration...
No, Lisa, that's not correct. Not correct. The Ministry of Health approval clearly states about the limitation of 100 passengers, so it's got, you can bring your ship and crew into New Zealand. There are these conditions, however. You must limit the number of passengers to 100 persons. You must provide a passenger manifest at each departure point to the Ministry of Health. So there's no question about what the ship was being brought to New Zealand for.
But immigration says that it made it very clear that every individual crew member on board would need to individually meet current immigration requirements and obtain their own visas. So the question is, why did the ship leave Jakarta when the 90-odd crew on board had not all had their visas approved?
We were not aware of a requirement of having visas approved prior to departing for New Zealand. Remember that we were on a 22-night voyage down to New Zealand to position. We were not made aware of that. Our New Zealand port agent, who handles all of our matters and handles all commercial ships coming in and out of New Zealand through COVID as well, they were not familiar of that either. So it wasn't until much closer, after we've travelled 3,600 nautical miles, that we are then told that that they would approve the technical crew, but they would not approve the hotel crew.
So this is on you and your agents then. The mistake has been made at your end. You didn't know the rules properly.
I don't know about that, actually, because, the Ministry of Health approval, one would, these people go through, they're interdepartmental, and they would be going through and liaising with each other on this is what we are about to approve. Do you have any issues with that? So, no, I think, unfortunately, there's been a disconnect between a couple of departments, and in the process has become unworkable.
What does this cost you?
To date, I was reminded by head office last night, to date, €972,000. So it's about $1.6 million.
And that bill is ticking up, I assume, because it ain't over yet.
Correct. Yes.
Do you have any piece of paperwork that indicates your entire crew got a green light from anyone, or gave that distinct impression to you that there was going to be no issues with the crew? Do you have anything that supports that position in writing?
We have the Ministry of Health approval letter, and in it states that obviously the crew require the appropriate visas before arrival into New Zealand. It doesn't say before you depart anywhere and come to New Zealand. So the crew manifest was sent through on the 8th of January.
But that means you take the risk, doesn't it, Serena? If you choose to leave port before your crew's applications are processed, that is your risk. There was no guarantee in your correspondence that they would get approval.
Well, unfortunately, there was no communication of what the process was.
Do you believe that every crew member on that ship is an essential worker?
Yes, because every crew member has certain responsibilities for safety management. And that's part of the training that we talk about, the STCW training. So we have a complete listing at every single position on board the ship, and then what their roles are in an emergency. Now, whether that be fire on board, whether it be, if a ship ran aground, whether there's an outbreak of disease on board, COVID, for example, there are all these responsibilities of what happens. And so any people who come on, they need to be trained on what their responsibilities are. We said to the Department of Immigration that we would try and locate, and maybe we could get around 20 New Zealand crew if we were lucky. We identified some non-safety critical roles that we could get approval from our flag state, that's the French flag regulator, that we could have some of these people on who wouldn't have been through our robust protocols, including our COVID outbreak management plan protocols. So we've put advertisements into the newspaper over the weekend in New Zealand. We've spoken to numerous recruitment agencies, and we're not having a lot of luck.
What do you want New Zealand Immigration to do here?
So I've informed New Zealand Immigration of that situation. We've been in touch over the weekend, and I'm just waiting to hear back to see whether or not they have any flexibility for the ship to arrive and operate as normal, as we would normally do, as any shipping company would normally do, if they have any flexibility in doing so. And if they don't, then we can't come. That's it. We're gone.
Serena, in a word, whose mistake is this?
I don't know that there's a mistake. I think what it is that there's been a lack of communication on the actual process.
So who is responsible for that lack of communication?
Lisa, I can't say that because, as I said, we've already expended around $1.6 million in just getting the ship to where we are now. I can't say that it's any particular person or agency or company's fault. We're just trying to work through the issues to try and see. I mean, my heart goes out to the poor travel agents, to all the suppliers who, we're starting to cancel the food, the beverage, the hotel suppliers, the technical suppliers, all the ports, all of that. My heart goes out to those people, and particularly the travel agents of New Zealand, because they've worked hard. They stand to earn around $1.6 million from our ship operating there. Now they're starting to earn nothing. Their income goes back to zero. That's what hurts me.
Are you concerned for the safety of your crew, given that they are in the area near Noumea and bad weather is expected?
I'm concerned, yes, because we're low on fuel. We don't have the approval for Noumea, and there are no other options. Now, this morning, we were advised that there's a cyclone starting to head towards New Caledonia and Vanuatu.
So their options are just to remain anchored there?
Yes.
And what risk does that pose?
Too high a risk. Whenever there's adverse weather, you are able to sail away from it. But we're in a very low fuel situation. So hopefully it won't come to that. Hopefully the weather abates somewhat. But anyhow, they're the sorts of issues that we're trying to deal with.
Serena Bratton there. Immigration New Zealand told Checkpoint it has no further update in relation to Le Laperouse, other than to confirm that it continues to engage with the owners to discuss their options. It is 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, still to come on the program, we'll speak to the Maritime Union about who's available here to do those jobs that weren't considered essential on that ship by Immigration New Zealand. Start shutting the door on petrol cars and prepare to go electric, New Zealand. And that's one message from the Climate Change Commission in a major new report that outlines a plan to address rapidly rising emissions. It proposes banning petrol car imports by 2035, along with slashing livestock numbers by about 15% and closing Tiwai Point. But with some barely able to afford to heat their home, questions are being raised about how people are expected to afford an electric car. Rachel Thomas reports.
Thank you, Sarah. $1,500 I have now, taking twos on. That $1,500 I have now, $1,500.
Another day, another car auction. The auctioneer seals the fate of dozens of vehicles every day, but what you're unlikely to see here is people buying electric vehicles. Turners is the biggest car retailer in the country, but fewer than 5% of its sales are for electric vehicles. While a new EV will set you back over $50,000, used models start from $15,000. Turner's chief executive, Greg Hedgebeth, says the reality is that's too much for most people.
It is early days, and I think there's still some water to go under the bridge. But yeah, it's certainly going to have an impact, I think, on the average Kiwi car buyer, which is a lot of those people are sub $10,000 cars. That's all they can afford, and you're not necessarily going to be able to come up with more money just to buy more fuel-efficient cars.
But the Climate Change Commission says decarbonising the vehicle fleet is a key part of making New Zealand carbon neutral by 2050. It proposes phasing out the imports of petrol vehicles, which would see 40% of the light fleet electric by 2035. But Greg Hedgebeth says any legislation around EVs could push up the cost even further. Much like other cars, most used EVs come from Japan, and there's limited supply.
When that legislation comes in New Zealand, no doubt more New Zealand dealers will be competing and bidding on those EVs that do come through. So that could potentially push the price up even further. But nobody really knows exactly how high those prices will go once that demand starts getting pushed up.
He says there's also a lack of options available. Some workers need utes and families need people movers. He worries the plan will have a counter effect and mean people hold on to older vehicles for longer through fear of paying for an EV. Long-time social policy researcher Charles Watergrave says although the environment needs to be a priority, many New Zealanders can't afford basic needs.
We have to cost how people who are on low or low middle income, how that can become affordable to them. Either the costs come down, and that's going to take quite some time, or there's got to be some form of subsidy, or otherwise we're going to increase poverty and we will have greater inequalities.
The Commission does suggest either a fee-bate or subsidy to reduce the upfront cost of EVs, but there's no detail on how big this would be. Transport Minister Michael Wood is reportedly looking at incentive schemes for EVs. Wellington City Councillor Tamitha Paul, who holds the council's climate change portfolio, is disappointed public transport isn't front and centre of plans to tackle emissions.
I would have liked to see a stronger kind of mandate from government saying, hey, we're really keen to work with local government and transport providers in order to make sure that public transport is available for everybody.
She plans to make a strong submission on the Commission's report, supporting ambitious action on climate change. The final reports will go to the governments before the end of May, who will then need to decide what to do with it. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
And we're keen for your feedback on that. Can you afford to shell out for an electric car? And are you ready to say goodbye to your petrol one? Well, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.go.nz. Also get in touch if you've recently decided you're going carless. How's it working out for you? In other feedback, some of you getting in touch about the cruise ship that is still in limbo now off the coast of New Caledonia. This person says, I have the world's smallest violin out here for the cruise ship industry. Not at all worried about them not coming. Plan better next time, silly cruise people. Paddy, on the other hand, has a different view. To be honest, sounds like a major stuff up by Immigration New Zealand. Paddy says this ship is coming to work in the New Zealand tourism industry. And we heard from the owners there who were saying it was going to be $1.6 million into the economy with suppliers and businesses in New Zealand. In breaking news, in the past few minutes, West Australian Premier Mark McGowan has held a press conference and confirmed the hotel quarantine worker who contracted COVID-19 has the UK strain of the disease. There have been no new cases of COVID-19 in Perth overnight, and flatmates of the positive case, who also worked as an Uber driver, have tested negative. 13 close contacts have also tested negative. 11 high-risk contacts of the man have been sent to managed quarantine as a precaution. 3,000 tests were undertaken yesterday. Masks are also compulsory. Police Commissioner Chris Dawson said a knucklehead rule is now in place, with people who refuse to wear a mask facing a $1,000 instant fine. Perth, Peel and the southwest will remain in strict level 4 style lockdown until Friday night, pending a full investigation. Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi has been detained in an early morning raid and a military coup is underway. The military has declared a state of emergency and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces has taken power. There's been escalating tensions between the civilian government and the powerful military in the aftermath of a recent election. The army says it carried out the detentions in response to what it's deemed a fraudulent election. Now, state TV says it's having technical issues and is unable to broadcast. Journalists on the ground have also reported problems with internet connections and phone lines. The BBC's Jonathan Head has more from neighbouring Thailand.
The capital, Naypyidaw, which is not the main city, but that has been more or less cut off. People are finding it very hard to get through on the phone or any other line. So Naypyidaw is where the military has its biggest base. It's also where Parliament was due to convene later today to establish a second term of office for Aung San Suu Kyi after her party won an even more resounding election victory last November. It was contesting that election victory and complaints of irregularities by the military that appears to have driven this action. Remember, the military last week made some alarming signals talking about replacing the constitution or even possibly a coup, then backtracked at the weekend saying it would abide by the constitution but still insisted that its grievances over the election were still valid. What's happened this morning really can't be overstated. It is an extraordinary move. You have to remember that the constitution that governs Myanmar right now was written by the military. The entire transition back to a democratic government was overseen by the military, which still has very significant power. It's guaranteed a quarter of the seats in parliament. It controls key ministries, and yet they appear to have moved today to neutralise the government, to take it over in effect before parliament can sit. There have been soldiers visible on the streets in many parts of Myanmar. It seems those have been brought out to detain key officials in regions as well, people like chief ministers. So I'm not sure the military will describe it as a coup, as a suspension of the Constitution. Under the Constitution, the military does have significant powers to declare a state of emergency, and that might be its option. But it is an extraordinarily dramatic and provocative move by the military, in particular to detain all the key leaders in Aung San Suu Kyi. These are very popular politicians. Aung San Suu Kyi is enormously popular. The election result was clearly in her favour. Her party won 80% of the seats in the main parliament. So this is not going to go unopposed, and it is a very risky move by the military.
The BBC's Jonathan Head reporting. Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta responded to the events a short time ago.
Yeah, we're really concerned about the events in Myanmar, and it's really important to ensure that the release of the leader does happen. Yeah.
Has New Zealand communicated that in any way yet? Will you be speaking?
We will be commencing our channels of communication. That's really important. You can appreciate that news has just come to hand.
And that was Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta. The 58 New Zealanders registered as being in Myanmar are being advised to avoid any unnecessary travel for the time being. The racing industry is reviewing security at raceways around the country after a punter managed to leap 3 barriers and get on the track. The Spectator ran onto Upper Hutt's Trentham Racecourse on Saturday and stood on the track as racehorses came thundering down the home straight. There were no injuries to horses or humans, but the industry is shaken by the near miss. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
It caught everyone off guard. The dramatic scenes caught on social media of a spectator jumping 2 waist-high fences, putting his life and the lives of jockeys and horses at threat. Jockey Lisa Allpress has seen nothing like it in the 20 years in the saddle.
Honestly, it happened so fast and it was so shocking and so unreal seeing somebody standing there on the track that I think I actually screamed or squealed, and then it was mind-boggling to see somebody standing there putting themselves in such harm's way.
She says there wasn't a lot of room for error with a full field of 17 jockeys and horses.
The first thing that went through my mind was, oh my God, the poor person that hits, I hope the jockey and the horse that hit that person are going to survive, because when you've got a field of 17 horses taking up roughly 1 metre or 1.5 metres of space, 17 horses across the track, there's not a lot of room left.
Social media's erupted with many upset at the man's actions. The footage has been shared and commented on thousands of times, with many saying there could have been a much, much worse ending to the race. James Dunn from New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing says it's been splashed across media around the world because it's a very rare thing to happen.
This is a story that's made the racing press around the world because people are just gobsmacked by the stupidity of what's happened. And also it's just so uncommon to have people invade the course. It's just such an obviously unwise thing to do that, as I say, it's made the papers around the world because of the stupidity of what's happened and how unusual it is.
He says the man will be banned for life from attending any races, and a full review is underway to look at security.
Clearly we don't want to lose the ability of the public to get close to the racecourse, to see the horses, to see the race, to enjoy the excitement of the racing. But at the same time, health and safety, it comes first. It's so important. And if we've got to take some more steps or consider some more options, absolutely, that's what we and the clubs will do.
The TAB says one of the runners, Boston Strongboy, was declared a non-starter because of the interference, and people who bet on that horse were refunded. Otherwise, it was business as usual as the rest of the runners crossed the finish line. The police have charged a 24-year-old man with criminal nuisance for doing an act endangering public safety. Police have confirmed with RNZ today that no further charges are likely to be laid, and he'll appear in the Hutt Valley District Court on Thursday. For Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell aho.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Maritime Union on crewing the luxury cruise ship with no place to go. Legal action is brewing over a massive car tyre fire, and dune hoons ripping up our delicate beaches. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Get in touch via text 2101, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The government is introducing legislation to uphold council decisions to establish Maori wards. Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta says the current system has a different set of rules for establishing Maori and general wards, and councils have asked for a law change. She says the Maori ward poll provision can currently be overturned by a local poll. The ACT Party is gearing up for a major battle on climate change proposals, promising it will not be cowed even if it is the lone voice in opposition. The Climate Commission's plan includes a ban on petrol car imports and gas connections in new houses, as well as a drop in livestock numbers. ACT's climate spokesperson Simon Court says the government should stay out of people's lives and rely on the emissions trading scheme and new technologies to bring down emissions. The European Union ambassador is trying to quell fears that the new COVID-19 vaccine controls will delay New Zealand's vaccine rollout. Over the weekend, the EU introduced controls on vaccines bound for countries outside the bloc, including New Zealand and Australia. But Nina Obermeyer says the step will achieve greater openness for global distribution, and this transparency will benefit New Zealand and ensure it receives its full vaccine quota on time. The armed forces in Myanmar have declared a state of emergency and detained the country's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, and other leading politicians. The politicians were taken into custody in a series of early morning raids across the country. State radio and television are off the air, and phone and internet connections have been cut. Prominent New Zealand artist Bill Hammond has died. The Littleton artist was 73 years old and is best remembered for his surrealistic bird paintings. Art curator, writer and commentator Hamish Keith says Hammond's work had a unique vision from the very beginning. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, energy companies, so this Climate Change Commission report, they're throwing their weight behind it.
Yeah, the report is certainly going to have major ramifications for the energy sector because a lot of the heavy lifting will fall on it to help slash emissions and decarbonise large parts of the economy. And we've heard about, the need to sort of electrify our vehicle fleet and shift industries that rely heavily on coal towards things like renewable electricity. And you can imagine that in the future, such an increase in demand will only necessitate the need for more supply. And Rod Carr, who was on Morning Report this morning, he spoke about 170%. That's how much we would need to increase renewable energy generation in this country by 2035.
To meet all the demands of the things that he wants to happen, like more electric cars, no more gas hobs in your house, etc.
All those things, exactly, yep, 170%. And the power companies, well, they seem up to the task, at least the ones we've spoken to today. A lot of them, they've thrown their support behind this new report. They say they support the bold action that's been taken by this independent commission. And one of the country's largest generators, that's Meridian Energy, says it will continue to invest in these new renewable projects. They're going to look to harness the energy from the wind and the sun. They're going to look to build these things down in the South Island. And they say that such investment, it will come with a hefty price tag. Think billions of dollars, but they reckon that the industry is well capitalised, and get this is probably pretty important as well, that plenty of overseas investors will be chomping at the bit to pour their money into green renewable energy products because that's the way a lot of energy or utilities companies are moving, and they're also profitable. But the major challenge that the chief executive of Meridian's, the major challenge they see ahead with a lot of this policy is the red tape. They say it's the whole consents process to get a renewable project underway. They say at the moment, from the inception of an idea to build a renewable project to actually starting the build, that takes a whopping 10 years. Now, so if the industry is going to meet these lofty goals that the Commission has set, they're going to have to half that time. So really, watch this space. This is such an interesting way to see the way that companies are going to have to adapt or think how they're going to sort of meet the demands of the future. And look, this is just energy generation. Early in the program, we heard a package about electric vehicles. That's another huge space where a lot of planning will need to take place. Right now, one thing I'm keeping my eye on, and I'm sure a lot of people should be thinking about this, is the battery industry group. Now, this is a task force that was sort of set up by the Ministry for Environment, about 80 stakeholders involved, and their job was to come up with a plan for all those used lithium-ion batteries that we're going to have to find a purpose for or way to recycle them when they reach the end of their lives. And this is for all the electric cars that we're supposed to be driving in the future. Currently, well, if you remember, I've mentioned this previously, that one of these batteries, when they reach less than 80% of their original health, they're kaput. They can no longer be used in a vehicle. So a plan has to be thought about how we can repurpose these batteries, or how maybe can we begin to recycle them.
So going green is not without its challenges. Okay, let's move on to wine. Villa Maria, is it for sale?
Yeah, the Australian Financial Review is reporting that the well-known and beloved winemaker has called in a Swiss investment bank to sound out other wine companies and investment funds about selling a stake or completely offering up full control of the New Zealand-owned business. And word is the winemaker, which has been controlled and been one of these beloved New Zealand brands for many years, won awards overseas, is being valued at $200 million. So, not a small margin by any means, but we haven't been able to speak to Villa Maria today because of Auckland anniversary day today, which sort of sees the whole business community shut down for a whole day. So hopefully we can get some more clarity from them tomorrow when, the city wakes up tomorrow. But what's interesting about this is last year I was on the show talking to you about the company's move to sell about 31 hectares off its vineyards and bare land around its headquarters in South Auckland. Now, at the time, they said that was all about funding future expansion plans, new markets, all that jazz. They said they're going to be looking to bring in some new investors, but at the time there was no mention about potentially offering the whole business for sale. So look, it's always sort of sad when you hear a business like this that's been in the hands of New Zealand ownership for so long starting to look for maybe foreign buyers, but this is just a space that we'll have to wait and see what happens next.
Okay, so not all of business goes to sleep on Auckland Anniversary Day. What have you got for us from the markets?
The NZX was down by about 30 points. Usually when Auckland Anniversary Day we do see really slow trading, so the market closed at 13,097. Our dollar is at 72 US cents, 94.1 Australian, 52.3 British pence. And just because it's in the news all the time at the moment, a single share in GameStop at the moment, $325 US.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. Now, more on that Climate Change Commission report. And has the sizzle gone out of the humble Kiwi Barbie? The Commission's advice would mean big changes for New Zealand's small businesses. Nick Trubridge reports.
The sear of a steak is here to stay, but how you cook that piece of porterhouse, scotch or eye fillet could be about to change. That's because the Climate Change Commission, in its draft plan for cutting the country's emissions, has advised the government it's time to cut the gas. Its plan suggests no new natural gas connections to the network or bottled LPG after 2025. By 2050, the Commission says existing natural gas in buildings should be phased out. But it's not just Kiwi households that'll be impacted. The Commission saying small businesses like restaurants and cafes will need to move away from gas to lower emissions solutions. Wellington chef Martin Bosley says that represents a huge change in mindset for the Kiwi cook.
95% of restaurants are on gas, and that's everything from its hot water through to its cooking equipment.
But what's wrong with electricity and renewable energy sources, and why is such a small fraction of our hospitality businesses using it?
Gas is efficient, right, and it's quick and it's controllable. Like it's immediate. I need to cook your piece of steak as you just mentioned. I put a pan on the element, I turn the gas on, and it's instantly hot. The pan gets hot, and away we go. And then when I'm finished, I turn the gas off, or I can. If I need to slow it down, I can, and again, it's immediate. With electricity, you turn the element on and you have to wait for it to heat up. So, so it takes longer to do. So it's just not a very efficient way of cooking.
Bosley says electric induction equipment is slowly becoming available for commercial kitchens, but describes it as prohibitively expensive right now. He says fitting out a kitchen so it was fully electric would be a mammoth shift for the country's restaurants.
Yeah, you're going to have to rethink the entire model. The amount of equipment you need, what you need, everything will change. The services, the plumbing requirements, the electrical requirements, and as equipment comes to the end of its natural life and you have to replace it with electrical, do you replace the entire kitchen, or do you just do you do it a piece at a time? It's pretty big. It's epic, actually.
Then there's the move away from gas in the home. Professor Philippa Howden-Chapman from Otago University's Department of Public Health says she's in favour of the change, but the country's lowest income households will need help.
So I think that's a good aim, and of course there will need to be some recompense or some subsidy for low income houses on who have to budget day to day and use LPG canisters. But those need to be phased out, and I think the time frame is reasonable.
Meanwhile, Consumer NZ Chief Executive John Duffy says electricity is just as cost-effective and efficient.
The big thing here is that what we're looking at is new connections, and all houses already have a connection to electricity. You can run your house relatively efficiently on electricity and heat your house to a suitable standard, including your water. So in terms of new connections, people aren't actually losing that much. Electricity is a perfectly suitable alternative to gas.
The Commission's draft advice is now open for consultation until March 14, and its final advice will be released before the end of May. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
It's about 18 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, the Maritime Union on who it thinks could do the jobs on the cruise ship bobbing in limbo after a visa nail-up. The National Party's reversed a long-held position to not stand candidates in the Maori seats. It's held various stances over the years, including to abolish the seats altogether in the mid-2000s under the leadership of Don Brash. Now leader Judith Collins says National has to be a party that represents all New Zealanders. Last year's election defeat is still fresh on MPs' minds as they meet for a 2-day caucus retreat in Wellington. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, is there and filed this report.
This is going to be an interesting and challenging year, and every year I've noticed it gets more interesting and more challenging.
Judith Collins, keen to move on from the disaster that was the 2020 general election. Part of that is a reversal of a position the party's held for near on 2 decades, to stand candidates in the Maori electorates.
I think it's very important that the National Party reflects better the population of New Zealand and the communities that we represent.
Party President Peter Goodfellow says they'll now work with the party's Māori partnership group, Kahurangi National, to prepare for 2023.
To build resources and identify candidates in seats. It doesn't mean we will be standing necessarily in all seats, but we will certainly stand in seats where we have the capacity and the resources and are able to support party vote campaign as well.
Ms Collins isn't happy with the level of Māori representation in the caucus, with only 2 MPs identifying as such and no Indian or Chinese MPs after the caucus's numbers were drastically cut. That begs the question, which MPs in the current caucus would be keen to stand in a Māori seat? One of the party's 2 Māori MPs, Simon Bridges, says he's happy to stick with being MP for the general seat of Tauranga. The other, Deputy Leader Shane Reti, also not keen on venturing into the Māori electorates.
I'm committed to the seat of Whangarei, but we're encouraged by the quality people who have already indicated they might be.
I think it's very important that we focus on the fact that it is actually the party vote that matters, and we may well see, let's just wait and see. It's a long way out.
Long-serving MP Jerry Brownlee became National's Māori Affairs spokesperson in 2005 after his colleague Georgina Tuhiuhiu quit the role in protest, and he defends the party's record.
The long history of the National Party has been one that's made sure that there was a general progress towards better understanding of the Treaty of Waitangi. We started the settlement process with iwi through the Treaty of Waitangi settlement process. All that's gone very, very well. So I don't think our record is something we should be at all concerned about.
Judith Collins says times have changed, adding it's not actually about winning the seats, but to give National a bigger audience.
Winning seats in this situation is very old style, first past the post. What we're after is those party votes.
But MPs also had other issues on their minds today, including how to pick themselves up after last year's loss, addressed directly by Ms Collins in her opening remarks.
I think this is our opportunity to really rebuild, to work together, to enjoy each other's company and to learn to trust and respect each other for everything that we do.
MPs were asked if the National Party has a problem with trust in its caucus.
No, I don't feel like that. I feel like it's a new start for us, it's a new term, and we're just going to get in behind, support one another and be as effective as we can, because that's what the country expects us to do.
We got a bad election result. We need to do a lot better. We're all conscious of that.
This is actually a workshop where we're actually learning to trust each other more, and I think it's good.
The caucus has gone through a difficult period in the last couple of years. That's a little bit inevitable as you go through the phase of being from government into opposition, but I've got trust in my colleagues.
The caucus retreat continues in Wellington tomorrow. Once that's wrapped up, some members will make their way up north to Waitangi. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And a few of you getting in touch about the cruise ship situation. It's now near New Caledonia. This person says the cruise ship industry is one of the most extravagant and carbon-intensive forms of tourism. In the current context, dire climate change, some activities must be left to wither and die. John, on the other hand, has a different view. He says this fiasco with the cruise ship is an indictment on the country's lack of flexibility. Cruise ship staff are multi-skilled and trained across the realities of being on a ship and not a land-based hotel. They are essential or the ship can't work, says John. Do keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Fiji has seen 3 cyclones develop in its waters in a matter of weeks, with rain causing major flooding across the country. The latest 2 formed within a day of each other. It came on the back of December's severe tropical cyclone Yasa, in which 4 people died and villages were flattened, costing millions of dollars worth of damage. Koro Vakauta reports.
The weekend saw Cyclone Ana, the first of 2021, sweep over Fiji's main island of Viti Levu. Yasa was a Category 5 storm, the highest possible strength, and Ana was a Category 1 system, but it still packed gusts of up to 140 kilometres an hour. Suva-based correspondent Lide Movono says the intensity of the storm surprised many.
It was a lot stronger than we anticipated. I think that given that we've been used to Cat 5s and Cat 3s and really everything above of a Cat 3, I think that maybe I personally and a lot of people might have underestimated what a Category 1 storm was like.
Lide Movono says many trees succumbed to the gales, including the landmark Iwi tree, which stood in the middle of Suva. Many so-called informal settlements were also damaged.
As expected, given the structure wasn't as great to begin with, and so that's been the situation so far. But there are markedly more people in evacuation centres across the country now.
Just over 10,000 people are still sheltering in evacuation centres. 1 person has died and 5 people are missing. One of the areas hit worst by flooding was Lambasa town on Vanuatu. Former mayor and businessman Charanjit Singh says it's been the worst flood he's seen, with waters as high as 2 metres.
I've experienced 2 other floods in Lambasa. One was while I was a mayor of Lambasa. It wasn't as bad as this. I'm well privy to this cyclone and its flooding to say that it is the worst.
He says no one's escaped the flood, but the impacts could have been minimised.
The rivers are all broken their banks, and one of the reasons why we are having this situation is that our rivers hasn't been dredged for so many years, and that's why with the slightest of rain, the town is flooded. The authorities who were supposed to look after this, they've been all probably sleeping on the job, so the people are suffering.
The suffering may not be over yet, with a 3rd cyclone emerging in the north of Fiji overnight, before just as quickly being downgraded to a tropical depression. However, as the Fiji Met Services Sakiasi Wambuta points out, the continuous rain will cause problems.
Most parts remain to be inundated as of now. The flood waters are just receding, but the rain hasn't stopped, especially over Vanuatu. Occasional rain elsewhere. Most parts of Fiji, tropical cyclone are now over the southern waters. It's still bringing all this rain across.
Another cyclone, Lucas, also formed in the Coral Sea this week and is making its way east into the Pacific. Charanjit Singh says it's a sad state of affairs.
3 cyclones in Fiji in the recent days, and we are still not out of the cyclone season. Probably there could be more. So definitely, when you see faces of these people in town, it's very depressing.
Correspondent Lide Movono says people are tired.
There's a lot of fatigue. There's also a lot of frustration from those that realize the links to climate change and the inability for our neighbours to come to better commitments with regards to global commitments to reducing global warming. And so there are a lot of frustrated people, but on the ground, people are just trying to keep each other safe.
In the meantime, the community will continue to band together to do what they can do, with at least 3 months left in the cyclone season. For Checkpoint, this is Koro Vakauta.
After a massive pile of tyres near Amberley was set on fire on Friday, a community group is taking the Canterbury Regional Council to court over its inaction in getting the tyres removed. Accountability Action says the council or the government needs to front up funds to clean it up. Meanwhile, a 63-year-old man is due to appear in court tomorrow charged with arson. Alicia Foon reports.
As the mountain of tyres on an Amberley property continues to smoulder, a community group is taking matters into their own hands. After a 2-year battle to get the 150,000 tyres removed, Accountability Action's director Bruce Gleadhill is fed up with the council.
Tomorrow I'll be lodging papers, basically a claim against, well not a claim but a suit if you like, against Environment Canterbury for failing the community in their management or mismanagement of the Amberley tyre stockpile, which is now the Amberley fire.
He blames the organisation for not handling the situation properly.
ECAN have mucked around for so long, not using their powers, have ignored the support of the Environment Court once. They negotiated an agreement with the people who stockpiled the tyres there and then failed to follow that agreement through in terms of monitoring the people removing the tyres. It wasn't a court order that they clear the site. It was an agreement. And I think the people who negotiated that were very, very clever, and the people at ECAN who agreed to it were naive.
Council spokesperson Andrew Arps says it has been working with all parties to get the tyres removed for the past 2 years. This has included an application to the Ministry for the Environment's Waste Minimisation Fund.
The reality is that all takes time because there's a number of components to bring that in together. Everything from obviously working with the landowner, legal aspects around ownership, proven logistics, to actually take the whole thing right through an environmentally friendly, appropriate manner, and of course funding, which has been very difficult. A problem was going to take probably close to $1 million to actually resolve.
Accountability Action spokeswoman Julia McLean says the tyre pile is at risk of contaminating the town's water supply.
We're calling on emergency funds to be released by Environment Canterbury or the Crown in order to alleviate contamination risk to the town's drinking water supply and to stop holding the community at ransom on this issue that has been going on for 4 years.
Last year, an Amberley homeowner was sentenced to 9 months supervision by the Christchurch District Council after admitting he set fire to the pile in February 2018. And thick black smoke once again blackened the skies this Friday, following another arson attack. Bruce Gleadhill says it didn't have to be this way.
It's a fiasco. What they're probably going to have to do is to scrape off the top 300 millimetres of probably twice or 3 times that area and transport that away. But you see, the dust is the problem. So everything's going to have to be contained, maybe mixed with cement or something before it's picked up. But it's a nightmare.
Fire and Emergency will be working with the council to clean up the burnt tyre remains. The leasee of the land, Michael Leroy, has been contacted for comment. For Checkpoint, ko Alicia Foon tēnei.
Drivers hooning down coastal beaches and over sand dunes in their four-wheel drives are causing a real stir. Several beaches have been cracking down on driving on the beach to ensure the safety of the public and the delicate ecosystems that live on the sand. Now, more beaches may be following suit. Alice Stewart reports.
Every summer, Kiwis from across the country take to the beach to bask in the sun and enjoy the warm weather. For some, a summer tradition is to take their car for a joyride on one of the country's long beaches. However, this joyriding comes at a cost. According to the Ministry of Transport, between 2013 and 2017, there were 75 car crashes on New Zealand beaches, with 9 people killed and 47 seriously injured. In 2018, 2 beachgoers were killed in separate incidents, including one case where a drunk Auckland teenager was doing donuts on a beach and rolled his ute, killing a 17-year-old. And driving on beaches also has an ecological impact. In December, RNZ spoke to police in Foxton who said they were cracking down on hoons driving along beaches in the Horowhenua district this summer. They were concerned about people getting hit by cars driving too fast down the beach. As a fire safety measure over the height of the Christmas-New Year season, the Auckland Council closed popular Muriwai Beach to vehicles. That's since lapsed, and Muriwai Community Association President Simon Leach says overall there was a supportive response from the community. He said the majority of people usually adhere to the rules of the permit system, but there's a small minority who don't.
The big issue we have is that, we just hear a lot of frustrations about people being up the beach and feeling unsafe with cars racing past them or rattling around in the dunes. And so those small number of people are really threatening the enjoyment of the bulk of the people who are up there, legitimately enjoying the wonderful resource that it is.
But now the problem's moved north. Kaipara District Mayor Jason Smith says joyriders are now tearing down Raiparo Beach. The beach is a legal road, but driving on the dunes is illegal. Mr. Smith says he is furious at the casual nature of drivers who traverse the dunes, running over ancient burial sites, disrupting nesting birds, tohiroa and tuatua beds. He told 9 to Noon it would be impossible to ban vehicles from all the beach, so says it is about respect.
Take special care. This is a very, very important and fragile place. It may look rough, but it's absolutely not. With archaeological and buried treasures, cultural treasures, and you're trampling all over.
Amelia Geary is the Regional Conservation Manager at Forest and Bird and says when people drive through sand dunes and on beaches, it has severe ecological impacts.
Sand dunes are incredibly sensitive and fragile habitat. These dunes are home to many different species that you can't even see from your car, such as lizards, spiders, and by destroying that, you're also destroying the homes of all these critters that you didn't even know were there.
She urges drivers to follow restrictions to stop the erosion of delicate ecosystems.
People take for granted that it's their right to drive on these beaches, but if drivers don't respect the rule and don't look out for wildlife, then this right can be taken away, and they need to be respectful of the regulation that's in play to ensure that it's safe for everyone, humans and wildlife.
Police say anyone considering driving on a beach must check what local bylaws or restrictions are in place. For Checkpoint, Alice Stewart.
And already you're getting in touch about the dune hoons. This person says there are often motorbikes doing wheelies in the sand dunes and beside the stream outlets along Otaki Beach. I find this selfish as there are dotterels, spoonbills, stilts, oyster catchers, terns and seagulls all feeding and nesting and trying to look after their young. The people on motorbikes can become threatening and aggressive if you say anything to them and increase their speed and burnout behaviours. I would like to see a ban on trail motorbikes on Otaki Beach. On the subject of cars and going green, getting rid of petrol cars, Jenna has got in touch saying we are a low-income family who have paid off our second-hand Nissan Leaf EV after 3 years at $100 a week. The amount we used to pay the oil companies and petrol costs. We did the maths and put the money into paying off the loan instead. So we've come out cost neutral, have a good little car and are now saving money. Jill says there are second-hand EVs available for less than $15,000. Your petrol costs finance your new second-hand EV. Charged with a 3-pin plug, the cost for electricity is minimal. And more of that after 6.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The councillor driving the petition for a poll on the establishment of a Maori ward in New Plymouth says the government's decision to intervene is a sad day. Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta announced in the city today that the government will introduce transitional measures, putting in place the same rules for Maori and general wards in time for the 2022 local elections. The introduction of a Maori ward can currently be overturned by a citizens-initiated poll. Murray Chong says the government is muzzling ratepayers.
I think it's a sad day in history personally because, we've got a government not wanting to get feedback from their people.
Murray Chong says New Zealand should be encouraging more binding referendums rather than taking them away. The COVID-19 response minister says there's nothing to suggest the EU stance on COVID-19 vaccines will delay the rollout here. The European Union has introduced controls on vaccines bound for countries outside the EU, including New Zealand and Australia. Chris Hipkins says New Zealand does not condone this course of action and has expressed its concerns directly, but he says he's had no indication from vaccine companies that their supply schedules will be impacted, and he says officials are in constant contact with the companies. A cruise ship turned away from New Zealand is still out in the South Pacific Ocean and running low on fuel. Le La Perouse sailed to New Zealand believing it would secure immigration visas en route after it had notified the Ministry of Health of its journey. However, last week the ship was refused entry after Immigration New Zealand denied 61 of its 90 crew visas because they're not considered essential workers. Ponant Cruises Asia Pacific boss Serena Bratton told Checkpoint that decision is wrong and New Zealand doesn't have the available qualified crew.
We've been in touch with multiple recruitment agencies, with shipping service agents for super yachts, trying to identify how many, if any, New Zealanders could be available to work.
Serena Bratton says the ship is currently attempting to dock in Noumea, New Caledonia. National will prepare to contest the Maori seats in 2023 but may not stand in all 7. The leader Judith Collins announced the change of position at the party's caucus retreat in Wellington. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
The last time the party stood candidates in the Maori seats was 2002. It's held varying positions over the years, including to abolish them altogether. Leader Judith Collins says times have changed and National must represent all New Zealanders. President Peter Goodfellow says work to prepare will now begin, but National will only stand in seats where it has the necessary capacity and resources. Neither of the party's 2 Māori MPs, Simon Bridges and Deputy Leader Shane Reti, has expressed interest in standing in a Māori seat. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
New Zealand is calling for the swift release of Myanmar's political leaders detained by the military. In a statement, Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta says New Zealand is deeply concerned by the military's seizure of power. She says New Zealand is calling for those detained to be released, including the country's leader Aung San Suu Kyi and President U Win Myint, and for a rapid return to civilian rule. Ms Mahuta says an election has taken place and the democratic will of the people must be respected. Consular advises for New Zealanders in Myanmar to avoid any unnecessary travel for the time being and to monitor media reports for the most up-to-date information. The ACT Party has vowed to fight a massive climate change plan, even if it is the lone voice in opposition. The Climate Commission's proposals, released yesterday, include a ban on petrol car imports and gas connections in new houses, as well as a drop in livestock numbers. ACT Climate spokesperson Simon Court says the government should stay out of people's lives. He recommends leaving it to the emissions trading scheme and new technologies to bring down emissions.
And I have confidence that people will be able to solve these problems. But it would be a rare problem that you could point to me and say a government bureaucrat in Wellington has solved for the benefit of humanity.
Simon Court says ACT will speak up for the regions and sectors which will be hit hardest by these proposals. A community group is taking the Canterbury Regional Council to court over its inaction in removing a massive pile of tyres near Amberley. Accountability Action wants the council or the government to pay to clean up the pile of 150,000 tyres. Group spokesperson Bruce Gledhill is fed up with the council and says he will file a lawsuit in the Auckland Environment Court tomorrow. Meanwhile, a 63-year-old man is due to appear in court tomorrow, charged with setting fire to the tyres on Friday that are still burning. It's 5 minutes past 6. Auckland have trounced Otago in a lopsided men's domestic T20 cricket match at Eden Park. The Aces chalked up just their second win of the season when they beat the Volts by 103 runs. Batting first, the home side made 183, but Otago could only muster 80 in reply, with black cap Kyle Jamieson taking 3 wickets. Auckland move ahead of Otago into 5th spot, with the Volts at the bottom of the table with just one round-robin match to play. Silver Fern, Bailey Bailey Mears says she's back to the same level of fitness she was before an injury sidelined her for most of last year. The New Zealand shooter has a strong chance of being named in the Ferns team to face the Australian Diamonds next month. Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Tauroa was impressed with Mears' fitness at a recent training camp, and Mears says she wants to utilise her speed.
I just want to keep it really simple. I want to be sharp because we're working on a specific style of game that we want to play, and just get those movements nice and crisp.
Bailey Mears. A blown tyre just 7 minutes from the finish has cost New Zealander Scott Dixon and his Chip Ganassi Cadillac team any chance of a podium finish at the Daytona 24-hour race in Florida. Dixon's team finished 5th, just a minute behind the winner. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, DNA detective work. Part 2 of my investigation into a new citizen science project in which I return to the scene of the crime, actually the water sample, with the EPA's Ham Davidson to find out just what's living and pooing in my local stream. Shannon Byrne has an Australian perspective on sport, and there's a window on the world of artificial insemination and Kenya's northern white rhino on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. The North Island except Gisborne, fine weather, apart from isolated showers about inland Northland today. Gisborne, cloudy periods with a chance of a light shower. Bulla, Westland and Nelson, fine weather. Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from morning and evening cloud about the east coast. Isolated showers inland in the afternoons and evenings. Fiordland, fine today. Drizzle about the fields clearing today and then returning tomorrow afternoon. For Southland, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Chatham Islands, cloudy. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Maritime Union reckons redundant Air New Zealand crew could have helped fill jobs on a luxury cruise liner that's been refused entry into New Zealand. Le Laperouse has an economic exemption to come here for the cruise season, but was left in limbo off the coast after immigration refused 61 of its 90 crew visas because they're not considered essential workers. The ship is now off the coast of Noumea, low on fuel with bad weather forecast. The ship's owner says waiters, housekeepers, entertainers and bar people on board must also have maritime safety certificates, and there's not enough qualified people locally to fill the jobs. But Craig Harrison from the Maritime Union disagrees.
It's sort of surprised me. I thought if the company had gone to the stakeholders earlier in the year and in the industry and told them they wanted to bring a ship down, there could have been some work done to find workers to fill those vacancies. For instance, the masseuse and the hairdressers and the catering crew. To give you an example, there's a lot of young workers that work part-time and casual on like the Ontario Island Ferry and straight shipping, and who'd love an opportunity to go into the industry. And just thinking about the workers that have been displaced out of Air New Zealand, if there could have been some funding through COVID, some COVID funding and work with the maritime schools to get some qualifications for even those people to try and fill these vacancies on the vessel.
So you're pretty confident, Craig, that we could have found New Zealanders to fill these spots with enough notice?
Yeah, with enough notice and planning and actually going to the stakeholders in the industry, like the various unions. We're a source of outsourced labour for our industry, and we promote actually finding young people to join our industry. And we'd love to promote, young New Zealanders getting a chance to, be part of the solution. And, it's a great idea getting a cruise ship. It'd be a great idea to actually get New Zealanders on it.
What about the seafarers certification that they would need to be on this cruise ship? Because the company says it's not just about getting a hairdresser or a cocktail maker. They have to have this certification. What is it and how hard is it to get?
Well, it's the same certification that if you go on the rail ferries between the islands, North Island and South Island, the catering staff and the cooks and the various deck crew carry these qualifications. So depending on what your ex-job involved, depends on what level of training, but there's a basic, they call it an STCW qualification to get on board a vessel. And then I actually had a look, and they were doing 7 trips around New Zealand, so they only need the qualifications that New Zealanders currently have for like straight shipping and the rail ferry. So unless there's something really special about the vessel, which I'd be surprised. Other than that, you've got the engineers, officers, and what we call the deck crew, so that's the seafarers that work the decks with the lines and anchors and stuff like that. It's a bit more involved, but we're bound to be able to help the source people for that industry.
So do you agree with Immigration's New Zealand's decision to deny 61 crew visas on the basis that they are not essential workers?
Yeah, we agree with that, and but there's a way to make it not a complete disaster if they wanted to approach the industry direct, and we could probably be able to help find solutions to source the labour. Because if you're fortunate, you've talked to the maritime schools, you'll find these young New Zealanders and Kiwis going through those schools now. They're struggling to get positions on vessel, and they've completed a lot of those basic courses already.
Do you reckon you could find them 20 crew, 40 crew by the end of the day?
I don't know about 40, but we could definitely have a go at 20. I'm sure we could try and rustle up around the country a whole lot of young workers. For instance, we just need to go to the maritime schools and ask for a list of the young kids that went through last year or then completed their course at the end of last year and are crying out for sea time. I'm sure we could find people.
Because they reckon they're advertising at the moment and they're having no luck. Looking at the ad, they want like 8 waiters, cabin stewards, 6 of them. They'd love a singing artist as well and a stage manager and some housekeepers too. So,
well, thinking about we've seen over the news over the recent months all the tragic story of those workers losing their jobs in New Zealand, and I'm sure if there was a bit of money put aside or some bit of help there in an industry, there's some great people coming out of that company that could have transitioned and be perfect for those roles. I'm sure there is.
Would a lot of those people have kind of been sucked up by the America's Cup, though, support boats and crews and with that, because that's what the cruise ship company is telling us. America's Cup has taken a few of these people out of circulation.
There would be a few, but I think they're overstating that because, there's a lot of people that actually don't live in Auckland, live all around the country that are looking for jobs, So you're talking hundreds of people that have lost their jobs at Air New Zealand in the cabin crew, then you've got the catering staff that support that cabin crew. So I'm sure that, given that they're willing to work, that there could have been a solution. And it would have been, a couple of months ago, if we had front-footed it, we could have had the solution waiting for them.
And that's Craig Harrison from the Maritime Union. And you listening seem to be pretty split down the middle on this one. This listener says, what travel provider employs staff that do not or are unable to gain a visa for their country of destination before leaving their home port? None. They thought the rules would be relaxed for them because of the need for tourism affected by COVID-19. No sympathy, they say. Sue, however, says, let the cruise ship come. All those New Zealanders excited about a once-in-a-lifetime holiday, been to sub-Antarctics, can confirm these foreign hospo staff are well-trained. I despair at our self-righteous approach, says Sue. A fresh climate battle is brewing in Parliament as the opposition parties mull how they'll respond to yesterday's landmark call to action. The Climate Change Commission has released a draft blueprint for how to slash the country's emissions, along with a raft of recommendations. Labour and the Greens are promising full steam ahead, but the noises are far from enthusiastic in Camp National and they're outright hostile in Camp Act. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Politicians know how contentious climate change can be, a volatile cocktail of conflicting motives and fears, both long and short term. But in recent years, the public sentiment has shifted in one direction. No more tractors on Parliament's forecourt, instead students in their tens of thousands.
Wake up, New Zealand! You are drowning, you are suffocating, and you are running out of time!
The cries have been amplified by the Climate Commission, its weighty report urging a massive overhaul, a suite of recommendations, all of which it says need introducing, and soon. The government's response will almost certainly define its legacy one way or the other.
The sooner we get started on this, the easier it will be over the course of the next 30 years.
The Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, knows they have the numbers to take action. His own Green Party is even surplus to what's needed. Labour could do it alone. Even so, they want more, as many MPs on site as possible.
Ultimately, what we have heard from the business community is that they really desperately require long-term policy stability that can go across multiple changes of government over the next several decades.
He has some reasons to hope. The opposition National Party voted for the Zero Carbon Bill in 2019, the legislation which set up the commission. But there is a caveat. At the time, Judith Collins was open in her distaste for the legislation, admitting she had even considered voting against her own party, the party she now leads.
It is important that whatever measures are put in place, that they actually make the difference that we're told it's going to make, and secondly, that we don't destroy our economy while we're doing it.
It's hardly a ringing endorsement. She's questioning the Commission's maths too. Its calculation that the changes would cost the country just 1% of GDP.
I think they're the only people saying 1%. I think lots of other people are saying other numbers, so I think we'll wait and see. There are any projections.
If National seems lukewarm, ACT is downright frigid. It was quick to issue a statement to supporters, vowing to fight the changes, even if alone. Its climate spokesperson, Simon Court, wants the government to stay out of people's lives, leaving it instead to the emissions trading scheme and improving technologies to bring down emissions.
ACT would be prepared to join a consensus when public policy and the government's policies are aligned with the aspirations of New Zealanders, which is for high-paying jobs, a clean, green future, but not one where the car they buy or the fuel they use in their home or for their barbecue is dictated by the government. That's not our future.
The year has only just begun and the political battle lines are being drawn. The government has given itself till the end of the year to decide its plan and also how to sell it. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. More than 2 million people in Western Australia have entered a 5-day lockdown after a hotel quarantine security guard tested positive for COVID-19. The quarantine worker, who also worked part-time as an Uber driver, was today confirmed as having the UK strain of the disease. The man's flatmates have tested negative, as have some of his close contacts, but others have been sent to managed quarantine as a precaution. The community case ends a 10-month COVID-free streak in the state, and masks are now compulsory. The state's Police Commissioner, Chris Dawson, has given an update in the last hour and urged people to follow the rules.
Police have not had to use a big stick approach with this. I call it policing by consent. The community, if they're not wearing a mask, police will talk to you and approach you. If, though, you are willfully disobedient and belligerent about that, I call it the knucklehead rule, and if you're not going to wear a mask and one's available, you will get fined.
Perth, the Peel region, and the South West region are now in lockdown until Friday evening. The case also brings to an end the fortnight-long stretch of no community cases across Australia, as the ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald reports.
It's a sweltering 35-degree day in Perth, but that hasn't stopped these shoppers lining up outside this supermarket preparing for a 5-day lockdown.
We heard the news and we just found out when all the car park was full. We were like, wonder what's happening here.
It was like all full and we were wondering what's happening. And this was also full and he said, I think it's going to be COVID. Like COVID is here. And then he checked his phone and he found it. Yeah, boom, it's going.
Perth, the Peel region, which is just south of the capital, and the southwest of the state went into a 5-day lockdown at 6 last night after it was revealed a security guard in his 20s working in hotel quarantine tested positive to COVID-19. People in the lockdown zone have to work from home where possible and only go out for essentials like groceries and medical appointments. The return to school will be delayed for a week. Gyms, bars, cinemas, libraries and places of worship will close, while cafes and restaurants will be takeaway only. Masks will also have to be worn at all times. WA Premier Mark McGowan.
The main thing here is we have a problem. We need the state and the people of the state to help in fixing it. And that's what we're trying to do here today.
The security guard who tested positive was working on the same floor as a returned traveller with the UK variant, and genomic testing is underway to determine whether he too has the highly infectious strain. Though National Cabinet committed to the daily testing of quarantine staff earlier this month, the program was only implemented in WA this week, which meant the security guard spent several days in the community while infectious before testing positive. He also has a second job as a rideshare driver, though he isn't thought to have driven while infectious. Professor Mike Toole, an epidemiologist at Melbourne's Burnett Institute, says he can't understand why all states and territories haven't adopted the key elements of Victoria's new quarantine system.
One is all the staff in quarantine hotels and in transport from the airport are employed by a single state agency called COVID Quarantine Victoria. So they all have contracts with that. They can't have a second job. The second is the daily testing, and it's PCR, so it's the best kind of testing. The third is that people can't leave their rooms for any reason. The fourth thing is very clear guidelines on the type of PPE that the workers wear, the best type of mask.
An investigation is underway into how exactly the security guard contracted the virus.
And that was Bridget Fitzgerald reporting from Perth. For the second weekend in a row, thousands of people across Russia have taken to the streets to protest the detention of the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Many of them were arrested, more than 4,000, one NGO believes. One was the wife of Alexei Navalny, Yulia. Anger is rising towards President Vladimir Putin, and the Kremlin is struggling to get a grip on the demonstrations. Here's CNN's Fred Pleitgen.
Russian security forces showing no mercy, cracking down on protesters demanding the release of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. But some telling us they want more fundamental changes in Russia. I came here today not only because of Navalny, this man says. I think it's more because of the lack of freedom and because of this demonstrative lawlessness that's going on.
I want a free election. I want change in our government.
Independent monitoring group OVD Info says thousands were detained across Russia. Many protesters, but also some journalists, including briefly me.
Sorry. All right, it's okay.
While I was released after a few minutes, many others were not so lucky. The U.S. Secretary of State condemned what he called harsh tactics against protesters and journalists. Riot cops often wielding clubs and in some cases even tasers. But as the protesters marched through the Russian capital, many motorists honked their horns in apparent support as they drove past. Alexei Navalny, whose appeal for release from detention was denied this past week, called for the nationwide protests. Vladimir Putin's government reacted swiftly in an unprecedented move, shutting down large parts of central Moscow, including 10 subway stops, in an effort to stop the protests, which authorities say are unsanctioned. But people came out in masses across this vast country, often braving freezing temperatures like in Yekaterinburg, and often faced with a harsh police response like in St. Petersburg, where OVD Info says hundreds were detained.
The law is violated in relation to Navalny and in relation to other people who went out peacefully and who were detained, who were provoked.
The rights of citizens are infringed. We want to live in a free country where the rights of citizens are respected.
Release, release, they chanted, referring to Alexei Navalny. Navalny remains in detention and faces another court hearing this week, locked away but not silenced, as many of his supporters have vowed to continue their action.
CNN's Fred Pleitgen in Moscow. Singing may be an effective way of spreading the coronavirus, but it can also have a therapeutic role in dealing with the after effects of COVID, such as breathlessness, anxiety and fatigue. The English National Opera's singing therapy, the Breathe programme, is being extended across the UK, and the BBC's David Solito was given the chance to join in.
When it comes to Zoom meetings, this is probably as stress-free as it gets.
A lullaby, some singing, and a lesson in breathing.
I am breathing in 10. I'm breathing out 10. I'm breathing in 9.
I felt bleak beforehand, and this was that light that I needed.
I'm breathing in 8.
It helped enormously. Up until then, I had felt rather left in the wilderness.
Breathing in 7.
What you're listening to is the Breathe programme. Susie Zumper is putting me through a few vocal exercises.
Wonderful. Put your spare hand on your head. So it's just your finger that's going to move and the back of your neck is going to stay long. Gorgeous. I'm loving the eyebrows that go with it.
But she's not a doctor. She's from English National Opera. And she has a vital area of expertise. Breathing.
One of the things that's really hard if you've been unwell for a long time is that you've potentially never been particularly conscious of how you breathed when you were well. Then it's been a struggle. And so getting back to what normal feels like when it isn't something that you are terribly conscious of remembering is already difficult.
And one of the patients on the pilot scheme is Richard Stenning. Last March, he ended up in intensive care.
The 36 hours of coming round from the induced coma was the worst time of my life. It was riddled with hallucinations and aching muscles, and there were still tubes and wires connected to me.
And since then, it's been tough.
I had to learn to walk again. I had to understand that my fuzzy brain was part of something which at the time we didn't know was called long COVID. I had dreadful breathlessness, which I still have, anxiety about various things. It was far from my mind that singing was going to be my saviour.
Let's try the whole song, but I want you to stay really tall and exude this calm. Ready?
It's a familiar story. Sheba was hospitalised in March and has since then spent months isolated, anxious and breathless.
I'm not a singer, but I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. Let me just give it a try. And am I glad I did? Because if it wasn't for ENO Breathe, I don't think I would have had my confidence back.
Could you have imagined the ENO helping you with your health?
Not in my wildest dream.
Glorious. Thank you, Ruth, for that excellent.
This pilot programme is now being extended to another 1,000 long COVID patients across the country. The evidence so far, according to Dr. Sarah Elkin from Imperial College, is that it's helping people recover faster.
With use of the lullabies that calm the patients and with use of the exercises that they do in between the classes, we can see that people's breathing patterns are better, they're breathing deeper, they're using their diaphragms more, and they're calmer. I really think this is helping people to get better quicker.
But it's also about more than breathing.
Summertime.
Music can be healing in many ways.
The first time that I sang Summertime with Susie, I remember becoming very emotional. The lines that particularly struck me were, one of these mornings you're going to rise up singing, then you'll spread your wings and you'll take the sky. But till that morning, there's nothing can harm you.
And that piece from the BBC. You've got a lot to say about climate change and getting rid of petrol cars. Overwhelmingly, your feedback has been in favour. Most of you saying that actually the cost, even though they might be more expensive upfront for a hybrid or electric car, that they're cheaper to run in the long run. But Valerie is a dissenting voice, saying the charging network is not up to it now. I need a hybrid. I have been saving hard and have $15,000 to spend. Give me a subsidy so I can buy a hybrid, or I will have to buy petrol. And Stephen says we've been carless for the last year. It's been easier than we thought, with a mix of e-bike, old-fashioned bike, buses, Zoomy and then rental cars on holidays. We're still able to do everything that we used to do. And this person says we've got an EV a year ago. It's our only vehicle. Family of 4, love it, love it. Never have to go to the petrol station, they say. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta says law changes to scrap the provision for a citizens-initiated poll on the creation of Maori wards or constituencies is long overdue. The United Nations and a number of Western countries are condemning Myanmar's military takeover of the government. A cruise ship turned away from New Zealand is still out in the South Pacific Ocean and running low on fuel. The ACT Party has vowed to fight a massive climate change plan, saying the government should stay out of people's lives and leave it to the emissions trading scheme. Our next news and weather is at 7.
If you think RNZ has breached formal standards, either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made in writing to the broadcaster first, within 20 working